The bruise bloomed purple and yellow across her cheekbone like some terrible flower, and Ethan Kincaid felt his jaw tighten the moment he saw her step off the afternoon train into the blazing Arizona sun. Apache Junction shimmered in the August heat of 1882, dust devils dancing down the main street as the locomotive hissed and groaned to a stop at the weathered platform. Ethan had been waiting there for nearly an hour, his worn Stetson pulled low against the glare, trying to ignore the curious stares from the other folks gathered to see who would disembark. Mail order brides weren't exactly common in these parts, but they weren't unheard of either. A man got lonely working a ranch alone, and decent women were scarce this far into the territory. He had written to the matrimonial agency in San Francisco 6 months ago, never really believing anything would come of it. The letters that followed had been tentative at first, then warmer. Florence Wright wrote with an educated hand about her life as a school teacher in Philadelphia, about losing her parents to fever, about wanting a fresh start somewhere new. She had sent a photograph, a pretty woman with dark hair and serious eyes, and Ethan had found himself reading her letters over and over by lamplight after long days mending fences and breaking horses. But nothing in those letters had prepared him for the sight of her now. One gloved hand clutching a small carpet bag, the other shading her eyes as she scanned the platform. She wore a traveling dress of deep blue that had probably been fine once, but now showed the dust and wrinkles of days spent on hard train benches. Her dark hair was pinned up beneath a small hat that sat slightly askew, as if she had stopped caring about such things somewhere along the journey. Ethan moved forward, his boots loud on the wooden planks. She turned toward the sound, and he saw the full extent of the damage to her face. The bruise spread from her left cheekbone up toward her eye, which was swollen nearly shut. Her lower lip was split on one side, scabbed over, but still angry looking. "Miss Wright?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. She nodded, something wary flickering in her one good eye. "Mr. Kincaid?" Up close, he could see she was trembling despite the heat. Fine tremors ran through her shoulders, and her knuckles were white where they gripped her bag. Ethan felt a cold fury beginning to build in his chest, mixing with something protective that surprised him with its intensity. "Who did this?" The words came out flat, dangerous. Florence flinched slightly, and Ethan cursed himself for his harsh tone. He softened his voice, though the anger still simmered underneath. "I mean to say, who hurt you, madam?" For a long moment she simply looked at him, and he could see her weighing whether to trust him with the truth. Behind them, the train conductor was calling for folks to board, and the other passengers were dispersing into the town. The platform was emptying, leaving them in a bubble of tense silence. "My uncle," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I told him I was leaving Philadelphia to come here, he said I was throwing my life away on some desert rat, that I was a disgrace to the family. He tried to stop me from going to the station. When I insisted, he—" She touched her cheek lightly, then dropped her hand. "I left anyway." Ethan felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. He forced them to relax, forced himself to breathe slowly. Getting worked up wouldn't help her now. "He had no right." "No." Florence lifted her chin slightly, and he saw steel beneath the vulnerability. "He did not. You got any other bags?" "Just this one." She held up the carpet bag. "I had to leave quickly. I took what I could carry." Ethan reached for the bag, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "Let me take that. My wagon's just down the street. We can get you settled, and then we need to talk." "Talk?" Something fearful crossed her face. "About what happens next," Ethan said gently. "I wrote to you asking for a wife, that's true enough. But I will not hold you to that if you do not wish it. You have been through something terrible, and I would not add to your troubles by forcing you into marriage with a stranger." Florence stared at him for a long moment, and he saw surprise replace some of the wariness. "You would let me go?" "I would help you go wherever you wanted to go," Ethan said. "Or you could stay if you wanted, and we could see how things sit between us. But that would be your choice, Miss Wright. Always your choice. Something in her face shifted, softened. I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Kincaid. My parents are dead, my uncle. She swallowed hard. I cannot go back there. I spent the last of my money on the train ticket. When I agreed to come here to marry you, I knew I was taking a leap of faith. That has not changed. Everything has changed, Ethan said quietly. You have been hurt. You need time to heal, to feel safe again. We can take things slow. How slow? There was something almost desperate in her voice. The town will talk if I am living at your ranch unchaperoned and unwed. She was right about that. Apache Junction was small enough that gossip spread like wildfire, and a woman's reputation could be destroyed faster than a summer rainstorm could turn the dry washes into raging torrents. Ethan thought quickly. There's a widow woman in town, Mrs. Sarah Henderson. She runs a boarding house. You could stay there for a while until you get your bearings. I will pay for the room. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering. Ethan met her eyes steadily. Miss Wright, I may be just a rancher, but I was raised to treat women with respect. What your uncle did to you was wrong, and I aim to show you that not all men are like that. But you need time and space and the freedom to make your own choices. So we start there. Florence was silent for a long moment, and Ethan could see her working through it all in her mind. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, but I want to pay you back, Mr. Kincaid. For the room, for everything. I can work. I taught school before. Perhaps there is something I can do here. Let's get you settled first, Ethan said. Then we can worry about the rest. He led her down from the platform and along the dusty main street of Apache Junction. The town sprawled beneath the shadow of the Superstition Mountains, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that served the ranchers and miners scattered throughout the territory. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Ethan could see Florence wilting in the heat. She was not accustomed to this climate, that much was clear. His wagon stood in the shade of an overhang outside the general store. Ethan helped Florence up onto the bench seat, noting how she kept herself carefully distant from him, always maintaining space between them. He did not take offense. Trust would have to be earned, and he was prepared to be patient. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a two-story adobe building on the quieter end of town, with a covered porch and actual glass windows, which marked it as one of the finer establishments in Apache Junction. Sarah Henderson herself was a formidable woman in her 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, who had run the boarding house since her husband died in a mining accident 5 years back. She took one look at Florence's battered face and ushered them inside without a word, leading them to a small but clean room on the second floor. I will need to speak with you, Ethan Kincaid, Mrs. Henderson said once Florence was settled in a chair by the window. Downstairs, now. Ethan followed her down to the parlor, where she rounded on him with surprising ferocity. You better not have had anything to do with that girl's condition, or so help me, I will have the marshal on you faster than you can spit. I just met her at the train station not 20 minutes ago, Ethan said calmly. Her uncle did that to her back in Philadelphia, when she told him she was coming west to marry me. She arrived here already hurt. Mrs. Henderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I believe you. That poor child. She needs tending to. That eye looks bad. Will you look after her? Ethan asked. I will pay whatever you need. She needs time to heal, to feel safe. I do not want to rush her into anything. You really were planning to marry her, sight unseen? We have been writing for months. I thought we understood each other. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. But things have changed. She needs help now, not a husband who is a stranger to her. You are a better man than most, Ethan Kincaid, Mrs. Henderson said grudgingly. Yes, I will look after her. You can visit during proper calling hours, and we will let the girl decide what she wants to do. But you keep your hands to yourself, you hear me? Yes, madam. Ethan went back upstairs to find Florence still sitting by the window, staring out at the unfamiliar landscape. She turned when he entered, and he saw the exhaustion in every line of her body. "Mrs. Henderson will take good care of you," he said. "I will come by tomorrow, if that is all right with you. We can talk more then." "Mr. Kincaid," Florence said softly, "thank you for your kindness. I did not know what to expect when I arrived here, but you have been nothing but decent to me." "That is how it should be," Ethan said. "You rest now. Everything else can wait." He left her there and drove his wagon back out of town toward his ranch, his mind churning. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange, but Ethan barely noticed the beauty of it. He kept seeing that bruise on Florence's face, the split in her lip, the fear in her eyes. Some part of him wanted to get on the next train east and find the uncle who had done this to her, but he knew that was just anger talking. The best thing he could do for Florence Wright was to be patient, to be kind, and to let her heal in her own time. His ranch sat in a small valley between rocky hills, a modest spread with a sturdy adobe house, a barn, and corrals that held his small herd of horses. Ethan had built most of it himself over the past 8 years, ever since he had mustered out of the cavalry and decided to make a life in the Arizona Territory. It was not much, but it was his, and he had been proud to write to Florence about it in his letters. Now, looking at it with her eyes, he wondered if she would find it too rough, too primitive. His foreman, a grizzled Mexican man named Carlos, who had worked for him since the beginning, was waiting by the barn. "So, where is the bride?" "In town," Ethan said shortly. "She needs some time." Carlos raised an eyebrow but did not press. That was one of the things Ethan appreciated about him. Carlos knew when to ask questions and when to keep his own counsel. That night, Ethan lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Florence. He had meant what he said about giving her time and space, but he could not deny the pull he felt toward her. It was more than just the fact that she was pretty, though even with the bruises he could see the beauty in her features. It was something in the way she had lifted her chin when she talked about leaving despite her uncle's violence, the steel he had glimpsed beneath the fear. She was stronger than she knew, and Ethan found himself wanting to know her better, to understand what had brought her across the country to this hard land. The next afternoon, Ethan rode into town and presented himself at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house at precisely 2 o'clock, which he figured was a respectable calling hour. Florence came down to the parlor wearing a different dress, this one a simple gray cotton that made her look even more pale than before. The swelling around her eye had gone down slightly, but the bruising had darkened to a deep purple black that made Ethan's jaw tighten all over again. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, settling into a chair across from him. Mrs. Henderson had stationed herself in the corner with some mending, playing chaperone. "Miss Wright, how are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted, "but better than yesterday." "Mrs. Henderson has been very kind." "I am glad to hear it." Ethan turned his hat in his hands, suddenly unsure how to proceed. "I thought we might talk some, get to know each other better, if you are feeling up to it." "I would like that." Florence folded her hands in her lap, and he noticed they were shaking slightly. "I feel as if I have stepped into someone else's life. Everything is so different here. It must be a shock coming from a city like Philadelphia." "It is not just the place," Florence said quietly. "It is everything. 2 weeks ago, I was teaching arithmetic to a classroom of children. I had a life there, friends, routines. Now all of that is gone, and I am sitting in a boarding house in Arizona Territory with a man I have never met, and my face looks like I went 3 rounds in a boxing ring." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. "You are safe here," Ethan said firmly. "Your uncle cannot reach you here. And you can make a new life, Miss Wright. A better life." "Can I?" She looked at him directly, and he saw the doubt in her expression. "I left everything behind on the promise of a man I only knew through letters. What if I was wrong? What if this was all a terrible mistake?" "Do you think it was a mistake?" Florence was quiet for a moment. I do not know yet. You seem kind, Mr. Kincaid. But I thought I knew my uncle too, and he showed me I was wrong about that. How can I trust my own judgment anymore? By taking your time, Ethan said, by not rushing into anything, by getting to know me as I am, not as I was in letters. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your teaching. What was that like? The change of subject seemed to steady her. Florence's expression softened as she talked about her students, the one-room schoolhouse where she had taught for 3 years, the satisfaction of watching a child's face light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. Ethan listened, asking questions, and gradually saw her relax. The conversation flowed more easily, and by the time an hour had passed, Florence was almost smiling. I should let you rest, Ethan said, standing. May I come back tomorrow? Yes, Florence said, and this time there was more certainty in her voice. I would like that. Over the following weeks, a pattern established itself. Ethan would ride into town in the afternoons and spend an hour or two with Florence in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, always properly chaperoned. They talked about everything and nothing his life on the ranch, her memories of teaching, the differences between Philadelphia and Arizona, books they had read, dreams they held. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something real between them, something more substantial than the words they had exchanged in letters. Florence's bruises faded from purple-black to yellow-green and finally disappeared altogether, though Ethan sometimes caught a haunted look in her eyes that spoke of deeper wounds that would take longer to heal. He never pushed, never pressed her for more than she was willing to give. He told her stories about breaking horses, about the time a rattlesnake spooked his favorite mare and he ended up in a cactus patch, about Carlos and his endless patience with Ethan's terrible attempts at speaking Spanish. He made her laugh, and each time he did, he felt like he had won something precious. One afternoon in early September, after they had been following this routine for nearly a month, Florence surprised him by asking if she could see his ranch. Are you sure? Ethan asked. It is not much to look at. I want to see where you live, Florence said, where I might live if things work out between us. I need to know if I can picture myself there. So the next day, Ethan arrived with his wagon, and with Mrs. Henderson's grudging approval, they drove out of town together. It was the first time they had been truly alone without a chaperone hovering nearby, and Ethan found himself acutely aware of Florence sitting beside him on the wagon bench. She had bought some new dresses. With money Mrs. Henderson had advanced her against future work. Florence had started helping with the cooking and cleaning at the boarding house to earn her keep, and today she wore a practical brown traveling dress with her hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat to shield her from the sun. It is so big, Florence said, looking out at the endless expanse of desert and sky. I keep thinking I should feel small here, but instead I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. I know what you mean, Ethan said. When I first came out here after leaving the cavalry, it was like the whole world opened up. No one telling me what to do, where to go. Just me and the land. Do you ever get lonely? Sometimes, Ethan admitted. That is part of why I wrote to the matrimonial agency. I got tired of talking to my horse and Carlos. Florence smiled at that. I was lonely in Philadelphia, too. After my parents died, I lived with my uncle and his family, but I never felt like I belonged there. My aunt was kind enough, but my uncle... She trailed off, then shook her head. I do not want to talk about him. Then we will not, Ethan said simply. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Ethan tried to see it through Florence's eyes. The house was solid, single-story adobe with a pitched roof and a covered porch. He had whitewashed the walls last spring, and they gleamed in the sunlight. The barn was sturdy, and the corrals were well maintained. Horses grazed in the pasture, their coats glossy in the afternoon light. It is lovely, Florence said softly. Really, Mr. Kincaid, it is more than I expected. Ethan, he said, if you are going to consider marrying me, you should probably call me by my given name. And I would like to call you Florence, if that is all right. Yes, she said. I would like that. He helped her down from the wagon, very aware of his hands on her waist, of how small she felt beneath his touch. Florence looked around with obvious interest, taking in every detail. Carlos emerged from the barn, and Ethan made introductions. So this is the lady, Carlos said, sweeping off his hat. Welcome, senorita. Ethan has spoken of nothing but you for weeks. Carlos, Ethan said warningly, but Florence laughed. Has he? That is good to hear. I was not sure if he found me too much trouble with everything that happened. No trouble, Ethan said firmly. No trouble at all. He showed her through the house, watching as she took in the simple furniture, the kitchen with its iron stove, the bedroom that he did not linger in, the spare room that could be made into whatever she wanted. It was not fancy, but it was clean and well kept, and he hoped she could see herself making a home here. There would be work to do, Florence said, running her hand along the kitchen table. But I am not afraid of work. Teaching school was not exactly easy either. There is no school in Apache Junction, Ethan said. The closest one is in Phoenix, and that is a day's ride. But some of the ranchers around here have children. You could maybe start something if you wanted. Teach out of the house, or we could build a schoolroom. Florence turned to look at him, and there was something bright in her eyes. You would do that? Support me teaching? Why would I not? You have a skill, something you are good at. Why should you give that up just because you got married? Ethan shrugged. My mother taught me to read and write. I know the value of education. If you wanted to teach, I would be proud to have a school teacher as my wife. You say the kindest things, Florence said softly. Sometimes I wonder if you are real, Ethan Kincaid, or if I dreamed you up out of desperation. I am real enough, Ethan said, moving closer. And I am here, and I want you to stay, Florence. Not out of obligation, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here, with me. Florence looked up at him, and for the first time since she had stepped off that train, he saw no fear in her expression. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Her hand was small and soft against his calloused palm. I think I am starting to want that, she said. I am still scared. I am still learning to trust again. But I think I want to try. That is all I am asking for, Ethan said. A chance to try. They stood there in his kitchen, hands clasped, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest. This was right. This was what he had been hoping for when he wrote those first tentative letters to a school teacher in Philadelphia. Not just a wife to ease his loneliness, but a partner, someone who could stand beside him in this hard land and make a life together. Before they left to head back to town, Florence paused by the wagon. I want to talk to the Reverend, she said, about getting married soon. Ethan's heart kicked up, but he kept his voice calm. Are you sure? There is no rush, Florence. We can take all the time you need. I know, she said. But I have been thinking. I came here to marry you, and that is still what I want. I have been living at Mrs. Henderson's for a month now, and while she has been wonderful, I feel like I am in limbo. I want to move forward with my life, with our life. If you are certain, Ethan said carefully. But I want you to be sure, Florence. Marriage is not something to rush into, especially after what you have been through. I am sure, Florence said, and there was strength in her voice. You have shown me nothing but respect and kindness. You have given me space to heal, to make my own choices. You have not pressured me or made demands. You have proven yourself to be a good man, Ethan, and I would be honored to be your wife. The honor would be mine, Ethan said quietly. They drove back to town as the sun began to set, painting the desert in brilliant shades of orange and red. Ethan's mind was already racing ahead, thinking about what needed to be done. He would need to talk to Reverend Mitchell, arrange a ceremony. He would need to get the house ready, make sure everything was perfect for Florence. He would need to Ethan, Florence said, breaking into his thoughts. You are thinking very loudly. He laughed. Sorry. I'm just trying to plan everything out. We will figure it out together, Florence said, and squeezed his hand. 3 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Florence Wright became Florence Kincaid in a simple ceremony at the small church in Apache Junction. She wore a new dress of pale yellow that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Ethan had picked himself that morning, riding out before dawn to find the best blooms in the desert. There were not many guests: Mrs. Henderson, Carlos, a few of Ethan's neighbors from surrounding ranches, the shopkeepers from town who had gotten to know Florence over the past weeks. But it was enough. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife and gave Ethan permission to kiss his bride, Ethan leaned in carefully, giving Florence every chance to pull away. She did not. Instead, she met him halfway, and their lips touched in a soft, sweet kiss that sent warmth flooding through Ethan's entire body. It was brief, respectable, but it held the promise of more to come. The reception was held at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house with food and lemonade, and even a small cake that Mrs. Henderson had made. People offered their congratulations, and Ethan watched Florence smile and thank them, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her. She was starting to bloom here, like one of those desert flowers that only appeared after rain. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to leave, Ethan found himself growing nervous. He and Florence had talked about the practical aspects of marriage, about sharing the house and their lives, but they had not discussed the more intimate side of things. He did not want to assume anything, did not want to push her faster than she was ready to go. But tonight she would come home with him to the ranch, and they would be alone together as husband and wife, and he was not entirely sure what to expect. Florence seemed to sense his anxiety. As they drove out of town in the wagon, with her few belongings packed carefully in the back, she reached over and touched his arm. "I am nervous too," she said quietly. "But I want this, Ethan. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. I am just asking for patience, for gentleness." "You will have it," Ethan promised. "Always." The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, and Carlos had made himself scarce, leaving them alone. Ethan helped Florence down from the wagon and carried her bags inside, suddenly feeling awkward in his own home. Florence looked around the kitchen, and he realized she was probably nervous too. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I could fix us something to eat." "That sounds good," Florence said, and he heard the relief in her voice at having something practical to do. They worked together in the kitchen, falling into an easy rhythm despite the newness of it all. Ethan heated up the stew that Mrs. Henderson had sent home with them, and Florence sliced bread and set the table. They ate by lamplight, talking about the ceremony, about the people who had come, about their plans for the coming weeks. "I have been thinking about what you said," Florence told him, "about teaching. There are at least 5 families within riding distance that have school-age children. If I sent word, do you think they would send their children here for lessons?" "I think they would be thrilled," Ethan said. "Most of these folks know the value of education, but there is no easy way to provide it out here. You could make a real difference, Florence." She smiled, and in the warm glow of the lamplight, she looked beautiful. "I would like that. I have missed teaching." After dinner, Ethan washed the dishes while Florence explored the house more thoroughly, making mental notes about what changes she might want to make. He found her in the spare room, looking thoughtful. "This could be a schoolroom," she said, "if we moved out the stored supplies and brought in a table and chairs." "Consider it done," Ethan said. "I will start on it tomorrow." Florence turned to face him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "I know we need to talk about sleeping arrangements." "We do not have to share a bed right away," Ethan said quickly. "I can sleep out here or in the barn or—" "No," Florence interrupted. "I do not want that. I do not want to start our marriage by sleeping apart." She took a breath. "I want to share your bed, Ethan. I want to be your wife. I am just asking you to be patient with me because I am still learning to trust, and I have never—" She blushed. I have never been with a man before. Neither have I, Ethan admitted. Been with a woman, I mean. So we will figure it out together. Florence looked surprised. Really? I thought most men. Not all men, Ethan said gently. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted to wait for the right person. For my wife. He reached out and took her hand. For you. Tears gathered in Florence's eyes. How did I get so lucky to find you? I am the lucky one, Ethan said. That night, they went to bed together for the first time. Ethan was careful, so careful, attentive to every signal Florence gave him. They took their time, learning each other in the darkness, and when they finally came together, it was with tenderness and care and a sweetness that left them both breathless. Afterward, Florence lay with her head on Ethan's chest, his arm around her shoulders, and he felt a completeness he had never known before. Thank you, Florence whispered, for being so gentle. Always, Ethan promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. The weeks that followed were a process of adjustment and discovery. Florence threw herself into preparing the spare room for teaching, and Ethan helped her every evening after his work was done, building shelves for books and a large table where students could gather. Word spread quickly about the new school teacher at the Kincaid ranch, and by the end of October, Florence had 6 students ranging in age from 7 to 14. Ethan loved coming in from the corrals to hear the sound of her voice, teaching lessons, loved seeing the concentration on the children's faces as they worked through their assignments. Florence was a natural teacher, patient and encouraging, and the students clearly adored her. Their parents were grateful too, and often sent along eggs or fresh vegetables or other small gifts in payment. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. Ethan worked the ranch with Carlos, training horses to sell to the army and local ranchers, while Florence taught during the day and managed the household. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the desert, talking about their days, making plans for the future. As autumn gave way to winter, Florence began to change. The haunted look left her eyes, replaced by a confidence that grew stronger each day. She smiled more, laughed more easily. The woman who had stepped off the train with a black eye and terror in her heart was transforming into someone who knew her own strength and worth. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Florence made an announcement. I think I am with child, she said, and there was wonder in her voice. Ethan nearly dropped the cup of coffee he was holding. You think? Are you sure? Not completely, Florence admitted. But I have missed my monthly courses, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. Mrs. Henderson said those are usually the first signs. Ethan set down his coffee and moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. How do you feel about it? Scared, Florence said honestly, but also happy. So happy, Ethan. I did not think I could have this, a real family, a real home. And now we are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby, Ethan repeated, and a grin split his face. He pulled Florence into his arms, holding her close. We are going to be parents. Florence laughed, the sound full of joy. We are, can you believe it? I can, Ethan said. I can believe anything with you. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Florence continued teaching until March, when she finally admitted she was too tired and uncomfortable to manage a classroom full of energetic children. The families were understanding, and Florence promised to resume lessons after the baby was born. Ethan hovered anxiously as her due date approached, trying not to be overbearing but unable to help himself. He made sure she rested, that she ate well, that she was comfortable. Florence tolerated his fussing with good humor, occasionally telling him to go work off his nervous energy in the corrals. On a warm May morning in 1883, Florence went into labor. Mrs. Henderson came out from town to help, along with a midwife named Rosa, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. Ethan was banished to the barn, where he paced and worried and nearly drove Carlos insane with his anxiety. The first baby always takes time, Carlos told him, but Ethan could not settle. It was evening before Rosa finally emerged from the house and called for him. Ethan ran, his heart pounding, terrified of what he might find. But when he burst into the bedroom, Florence was sitting up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Ethan approached slowly, barely breathing, and Florence pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes squinted shut, one small fist waving in the air. His son. He had a son. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's soft cheek. "You are perfect, both of you. We decided on Thomas, if you agree," Florence said. "After my father." "Thomas Kincaid," Ethan said, testing the name. "I like it. It is strong." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Florence shifted so he could hold the baby. Thomas felt impossibly light and fragile in his arms, and Ethan was terrified of doing something wrong. But as he held his son, feeling the warmth of the small body against his chest, something fierce and protective swelled in his heart. "I will take care of you both," he promised. "Always, no matter what." Florence smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "I know you will. You already have." The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, bright and curious about everything around him. Florence resumed teaching, with Thomas often sleeping in a basket in the corner of the schoolroom during lessons. The ranch prospered as Ethan's reputation for training quality horses spread throughout the territory. They added onto the house, building a proper parlor and another bedroom. When Thomas was 3, Florence announced she was pregnant again, and this time Ethan managed to be slightly less anxious. Their daughter Sarah was born in the spring of 1886, a tiny thing with dark hair like her mother and her father's gray eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector, which Ethan found both amusing and touching. Arizona became an official state in what felt like no time, and Apache Junction grew from a dusty frontier town into a real community. New families arrived, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. Florence's school expanded until she had 15 regular students, and Ethan built a separate schoolhouse on their property to accommodate them all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Florence into town for dinner at the new restaurant that had opened on Main Street. As they sat across from each other, he marveled at how much had changed since that day he had seen her step off the train with a bruise on her face and fear in her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Florence asked, smiling at him over her coffee. "About how lucky I am," Ethan said. "About how different our lives could have been if you had not gotten on that train." Florence reached across the table and took his hand. "I think about that sometimes too, about how close I came to staying in Philadelphia, to letting my fear keep me trapped. But I took that chance, and it brought me to you." "I love you," Ethan said. "I know I do not say it often enough, but I do. More than anything, I know," Florence said softly. "You show me every day in 100 small ways, and I love you too, Ethan Kincaid. You saved me, you know. Not just from my uncle, but from a life where I would have been too afraid to take chances, to trust, to hope. You taught me what real love looks like." "You saved me too," Ethan said. "I did not even realize how lonely I was until I had you to share my life with." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands clasped across the table, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background. After a while, Florence spoke again. "Do you ever wonder what happened to my uncle? If he ever regretted what he did?" It was the first time in years she had mentioned him. Ethan chose his words carefully. "I do not know if men like that are capable of regret, but I hope he knows that despite everything he did to hurt you, to stop you, you built a good life anyway." "You won." Florence nodded slowly. "I did I not? I won." She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who knew her own strength. We both did. The children grew. Thomas turned out to have his father's way with horses and spent every moment he could in the corrals, learning to train and ride. Sarah had her mother's love of learning and could often be found curled up with a book, reading far beyond her years. Ethan and Florence watched them with pride and joy, grateful for every moment. There were hard times, too. A drought one year that nearly broke them before the rains finally came, a sickness that swept through the territory, though thankfully their family was spared. The death of Carlos when Thomas was 10, which hit them all hard, but they weathered each storm together, their bond growing stronger through the challenges. On a summer evening, when Thomas was 15 and Sarah was 12, the family sat on the expanded porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Thomas was talking about a particularly stubborn mare he had been working with, and Sarah was trying to convince her mother to let her help teach the younger students in the fall. Ethan sat back in his rocking chair, Florence beside him, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was his life. This noisy, chaotic, wonderful life with the woman he loved and the children they had created together. This was everything he had hoped for, and more than he had ever dreamed possible. Florence must have sensed his mood because she reached over and squeezed his hand. When he looked at her, she was smiling at him with all the love in the world shining from her eyes. "Happy?" she asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," Ethan said. As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ethan thought about that day 10 years ago when Florence had stepped off the train. He thought about the question he had asked her then, who did this, and how that moment had been the beginning of everything. He had wanted to protect her, to help her, but she had ended up being so much more than someone who needed saving. She had become his partner, his love, the center of his world. The years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch work as he grew into a strong young man, and when he turned 20, he married a girl from town named Emily, the daughter of the new banker. They built a small house on the far side of the property, and before long, Ethan and Florence were grandparents to a boisterous grandson named James. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college back east to study literature. Ethan had been resistant at first, worried about his daughter traveling so far, but Florence had been firm. "We raised her to be independent and to pursue her dreams," Florence told him. "We cannot hold her back now just because we will miss her." So Sarah went to Boston for college, and though Ethan did miss her terribly, he was proud beyond measure when she graduated with honors and returned to Arizona to teach at the newly established high school in Phoenix. The ranch remained successful, and Ethan slowly began to turn more of the day-to-day operations over to Thomas, content to take a step back and enjoy his later years. He and Florence spent their time working in the garden she had cultivated, taking long rides through the desert they both loved, and doting on their grandchildren as Sarah eventually married and added 2 more to the family. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party with half the town in attendance. Ethan looked around at the crowd of friends and family, at the life they had built, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Florence had been right all those years ago. They had won. Against all odds, against the violence and fear that had marked the beginning of her journey west, they had built something beautiful and lasting. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Ethan and Florence slipped away to walk beneath the stars, something they had done countless times over the years. The desert night was cool and quiet, the sky brilliant with stars. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I arrived?" Florence asked, looking up at the stars. "I asked who hurt you," Ethan said quietly. "And then you promised me I was safe, that I could make my own choices." Florence turned to face him, and in the starlight, she looked almost exactly as she had that first day, despite the silver threading through her dark hair and the lines time had etched around her eyes. "You kept that promise, Ethan. Every single day for 25 years, you have kept that promise." "It was not hard," Ethan said, pulling her close. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. They stood there in the desert night, wrapped in each other's arms, and Ethan felt the circle of their life together, closing in the most perfect way. This was what happiness looked like, not fireworks or grand gestures, but quiet moments of connection, of choosing each other day after day, year after year. When they finally walked back to the house, their children had cleaned up from the party and left them a note saying they had all gone home but would see them for Sunday dinner. Ethan and Florence made their way to their bedroom, helping each other out of their party clothes with the ease of long practice. As they lay in bed together, Florence's head on his shoulder, just as it had been on their wedding night all those years ago, Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them here. A mail-order bride with a black eye and a cowboy who had asked the right question. It seemed like such a small thing, but it had changed both their lives completely. "What are you thinking about?" Florence murmured sleepily. "About how grateful I am," Ethan said, "for every moment we have had together, for every moment still to come." "Me too," Florence said. "Thank you for giving me a life worth living, Ethan. Thank you for choosing me," Ethan replied, "for taking that leap of faith." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, hearts beating in sync. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the darkness, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. The years grew gentler as Ethan and Florence entered their 60s. They had earned their rest, and they took it, spending long, lazy mornings over coffee on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas ran the ranch with the same dedication Ethan had always shown, and the business continued to thrive. Sarah's teaching career flourished, and she often brought her students out to the ranch for field trips, just as Florence had once done. Florence eventually retired from teaching, though she still tutored students who were struggling and served on the school board in Apache Junction. She spent her time reading, gardening, and writing long letters to Sarah's children, who were now grown and starting families of their own. Ethan's body began to slow down, his joints stiff from decades of hard ranch work, but his mind remained sharp and his heart full. He loved nothing more than sitting with Florence in the evenings, talking about the day, reminiscing about their life together, making plans for visits from their growing family. One spring evening, as they sat watching the sunset from their favorite spot on the porch, Florence turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "I was going through some old papers today," she said, "and I found the letters you wrote to me before I came here. Do you remember what you wrote in that first letter?" "Tell me," Ethan said, smiling. "You said you were looking for a partner, someone to share the work and the rewards of building a life in the Arizona territory. You said you wanted someone who was not afraid of hard work or hard times, someone who could stand beside you through whatever came." Florence's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You found all that and more, Ethan. We built something so much better than I ever imagined possible." "We did," Ethan agreed, reaching for her hand. "And I would do it all again exactly the same way just to end up right here with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the stars emerged one by one. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and Emily getting dinner ready they had taken to coming by several evenings a week to cook for Ethan and Florence, a kindness that Ethan appreciated more than he could say. "Promise me something," Florence said suddenly. "Anything. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not shut yourself away from the world, that you will keep living, keep finding joy." "Florence," "I am serious, Ethan. I want you to promise. I could not bear the thought of you being lonely and sad after I am gone." "You are not going anywhere," Ethan said firmly. "We are going to grow old together and spoil our great-grandchildren and drive Thomas crazy with our stubbornness." Florence laughed, but her expression remained serious. "Promise me anyway." "Only if you promise the same," Ethan countered. "If I go first, you keep teaching, keep living, keep opening your heart to people. Deal?" "Deal," Florence said, and they shook on it like they were signing a business contract, both of them smiling despite the seriousness of the conversation. But as it turned out, neither of them had to keep that promise for many years. They continued on together, a unit, a team, just as they had always been. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. They welcomed great-grandchildren and marveled at how the world was changing around them. Automobiles replaced horses in town, electricity came to Apache Junction, and the wild frontier they had known transformed into something more settled and civilized. Through it all, Ethan and Florence remained constants for each other, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. The passion of their early years had evolved into something richer and more complex, a bone-deep knowledge of each other, a comfort in each other's presence, a trust that had been tested and proven over decades. On a warm October afternoon, shortly after their 40th wedding anniversary, Ethan woke from a nap on the porch to find Florence sitting beside him, watching him with a soft smile. "What?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "I was just thinking about how much I love you," Florence said simply, "and how grateful I am for every day we have had together." Ethan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. Their hands were both marked by age, now his gnarled and calloused from decades of ranch work, hers spotted and thin-skinned, but still gentle. But when they touched, Ethan felt the same spark he had felt the first time she had taken his hand in his kitchen all those years ago. "I love you too," he said, "more than words can say." They sat together as the afternoon sun slanted across the porch, warming their faces. In the distance, they could hear Thomas working with horses in the corrals, the sound of hoofbeats and low voices carrying on the breeze. A few of the great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter bright and joyful. This was their legacy, Ethan thought. Not just the ranch or the school or the material things they had built, but this family, love, connection. They had taken the pain and fear that had marked the beginning of Florence's journey west and transformed it into something beautiful. They had created a life full of purpose and meaning, surrounded by people they loved. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had watched together for 4 decades, Florence leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Writing to that matrimonial agency? Taking a chance on a woman you had never met?" "Not for one single second," Ethan said firmly. "That was the best decision I ever made." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Florence Kincaid." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Florence replied. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Ethan. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You showed me what real love looks like: patient, kind, steady, true. Everything I am, everything we built, it is because you asked me who did this and then gave me the space and safety to heal." "We healed each other," Ethan said. "You gave me purpose too, Florence. You filled up all the empty places I did not even know I had." They sat together until the stars came out, until Thomas came to gently suggest they come inside for dinner, until the night grew cool and they retreated into the warmth of the house they had shared for so many years. And as they prepared for bed, moving through their nighttime routine with the ease of long practice, Ethan thought about how lucky he was to have found this woman, to have built this life. He had been a lonely cowboy, working a small ranch in the Arizona desert, and she had been a frightened woman escaping violence and seeking a new start. Together, they had become so much more partners, lovers, best friends, the center of each other's worlds. They had weathered droughts and sickness, loss and hardship, and they had celebrated births and marriages, successes and triumphs. Through it all, they had chosen each other, day after day, year after year. As they lay in bed that night, Florence's head on his shoulder, as it had been for 40 years, Ethan pressed a kiss to her hair. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night," Florence murmured back, already half asleep. "See you in the morning." And they would. Tomorrow and the next day, and the day after that, they would wake up together and face whatever came, just as they always had. The mail-order bride with the black eye and the cowboy who had asked the right question had found something precious and rare: true love, lasting love, the kind of love that sustained through all of life's seasons. Their story, which had begun with violence and fear and uncertainty, had become one of hope and healing and joy. And as Ethan drifted off to sleep, Florence warm and safe in his arms, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. That was what mattered. That was everything. The years had been kind to them in the end, granting them not just love, but also time. Time to build, to grow, to watch their family flourish, to see the fruits of all their hard work and dedication. They had made their mark on the Arizona territory, on Apache Junction, on all the lives they had touched through teaching and ranching and simply being examples of what a good marriage could be. Their love story had started with a question: who did this? But it had become an answer to so many other questions. What does real love look like? How do you build a life with someone? How do you heal from trauma and fear? How do you create something meaningful and lasting in a hard, unforgiving land? The answer was always the same: together, with patience, with kindness, with unwavering commitment to each other and to the life they were building. Ethan and Florence Kincaid had shown everyone around them what that looked like, and their legacy would live on long after they were gone, in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the school Florence had built and the ranch Ethan had established, in the very fabric of the community they had helped create. As the moon rose over the Arizona desert, casting silver light across the land they loved, Ethan and Florence slept peacefully, their hands still clasped beneath the covers, their hearts still beating in rhythm after all these years. They had found what everyone searches for: true love, lasting happiness, a life well lived, and they had found it together against all odds in the wild beauty of the American West. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal. From that first moment on the train platform when Ethan had seen her bruised face and felt his protective instincts rise, to this peaceful night 40 years later, they had walked their path together. The mail-order bride and the cowboy had become so much more than the sum of their parts. They had become partners, soulmates, the great love of each other's lives. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they had endured or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the life they had built together. It was a good life, a blessed life, and they had lived it fully and well, cherishing every moment, grateful for every day. The bruises had long since faded, but the love remained, strong and true and unwavering, a beacon of hope and proof that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest endings.